A wealthy CEO turns down all the affluent women, only to find himself captivated by a humble food delivery girl. Before we dive into the tale, share with us in the comments your location as you tune in. Delight in the tale. Richard Stone found himself in a state of ennui, despite being amidst the city's most elite gathering, encircled by affluent, adoring women. He masked his impatience while enduring the hollow chatter about extravagant vacations and exquisite gems. Just as he was preparing to concoct an excuse to make his exit, an unforeseen event unfolded. From across the room, a furious scream pierced the atmosphere. What on earth? Every gaze was fixed on the doorway. A man of notable stature, clad in an immaculate white suit, one of the city's most influential bankers, now found himself utterly soaked in crimson liquid. Before him stood a modest young woman, clutching a delivery bag from Oriental Flavor Restaurant. Her eyes were wide, as though she had just unwittingly triggered a detonation. "Oh my goodness, I truly apologize. I didn't notice you standing there," she faltered, anxiety coursing through her, desperately attempting to clean his shirt with a napkin. The entire room erupted in laughter. Who allows someone like that to enter this place? She likely hasn't encountered a suit in person before. What a catastrophe. Layla's cheeks flushed with a deep sense of humiliation. "I was simply making a delivery. The application directed me to an incorrect location." The banker, desperately clinging to his last hopes, exhaled in frustration. "Remove this girl immediately." Before Layla had a chance to respond, a security guard suddenly materialized and seized her arm. "You don't belong here," he said with a chilling detachment. She attempted to break free, but his grip was unyielding. "Hold on, I was in the middle of a delivery. I am not entering without permission." At that moment, Richard made his entrance. "Allow her to leave." The sentinel stood still. The guests shared bewildered looks. The banker scowled. "Richard, please tell me you're not standing up for this girl." However, Richard paid no heed to the man's fury and approached Layla, arms crossed defiantly. "What's your name?" he inquired. "What brings you here?" Layla swallowed hard, still in disbelief that the wealthiest man in the city was addressing her. "I'm Layla," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I'm currently employed at Oriental Flavor Restaurant, handling deliveries, but the app directed me to an incorrect location." Richard squinted, his gaze sharp and focused. "Hold on, is that the place that brings yakisoba to your door?" Layla blinked, her mind swirling in a haze of uncertainty. "Absolutely. What gives you that insight?" It was at that moment that Richard's smile finally broke through the darkness of the night. "Ah, so you're the talented individual behind that incredible yakisoba." Layla ran her fingers through her hair, a thoughtful gesture as she pondered her next move. "Ah, it's a cherished recipe passed down from my grandmother. I simply assist in getting it ready." Richard stroked his chin, deep in thought. "That's absolutely ideal. I require a chef." Layla stood still. "Excuse me?" The visitors inhaled sharply together. The banker's gaze grew larger. "Richard, surely you jest." Yet Richard remained indifferent. "I will compensate you with 3 times your earnings as a delivery driver." Layla nearly gasped for air. 3 times as much? Indeed. She remained in a state of disbelief. That amount was quite substantial. Yet, she felt she couldn't abandon her grandmother at the restaurant. Layla's mind raced with ideas. If she was going to embark on this journey, it had to hold significant value. With her arms crossed, she impulsively exclaimed, 5 times more. The guests stared in astonishment. The banker, desperately clinging to his fortunes, was on the brink of a heart attack. Richard lifted an eyebrow, taken aback. "You have quite high expectations. I have some bills that need to be settled." He smiled, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "For times? 4.5? Richard squinted, his gaze sharp and focused. "Is this your usual approach to negotiation?" "Only when I'm facing difficulties." The whole room was utterly stunned. The banker exhaled sharply, a wave of irritation washing over him. "Richard, are you seriously considering bringing this girl on board?" Yet Richard continued to gaze at Layla. Then he flashed a sly grin. Agreed. Layla's eyes grew large with surprise. Excuse me? Your journey begins tomorrow. Hold on a moment. The atmosphere buzzed with hushed conversations and bursts of laughter. Layla cast a glance at Richard, then down at her soiled apron, and finally surveyed the affluent crowd surrounding her. What just transpired? Her purpose was solely to drop off a package. At this moment, she embarked on a new professional journey. What's even more frustrating, she found herself employed by a billionaire CEO whose unpredictability knew no bounds. What could possibly go awry? The following morning, Layla awoke, still in disbelief over the events of the previous night. She blinked several times, attempting to collect her thoughts. Did I truly consent to take a position with a billionaire CEO? The voice of her grandmother resonated from beyond the door. Layla, my dear, breakfast is prepared and waiting for you. With a deep breath, Layla rose and ventured out of her room. In the cozy kitchen of the Oriental Flavor restaurant, her grandmother was skillfully wrapping up the frying of the spring rolls for the day's first deliveries. How did that grand celebration go? The elderly woman inquired, her gaze fixed elsewhere, not bothering to glance back at her. Layla picked up a steaming cup of coffee and settled into her chair at the table. Oh, it was wonderful. I created quite the scene, dousing a banker in juice, nearly got myself thrown out, and now here I am working for Richard Stone. Her grandmother halted abruptly, the spatula suspended in the air. Excuse me? I understand. It may seem unbelievable, but he proposed to pay me 5 times my current salary, and I went ahead and accepted, though only on a part-time basis. Her grandmother resumed stirring the spring rolls in the pan, lost in contemplation. So, do you have faith in this individual? Layla gave a nonchalant shrug. He devours our yakisoba every week. If he were truly a threat, he would have attempted to abduct me by this point. The elderly lady let out a soft laugh and gently shook her head. Very well, proceed. If he causes any issues, just inform me, and I'll take care of it. With a swift motion, Layla downed her coffee and rose to her feet. Send some good vibes my way that I managed to keep everything intact on my first day. The Stone Enterprises building loomed even larger and more imposing when seen from a close distance. Upon entering, Layla was greeted by a rush of cold air from the AC, her eyes catching sight of numerous employees clad in suits and high heels, bustling about, engaged in phone conversations or tapping away on sleek tablets. She tightened her apron, a sense of unease washing over her. A receptionist in elegant attire regarded her with an expression that revealed nothing. How may I assist you? Greetings, I am Layla, the newly appointed cook for Richard. The woman blinked deliberately, as though she were attempting to discern if this was merely a jest. Following a fleeting, tense pause, she swiftly grabbed the phone and dialed. Mr. Stone, your new chef has arrived. Layla caught a faint reply from the other side, and the receptionist gestured toward the elevator. Highest level. Layla inhaled deeply and crossed the threshold, her stomach churning with anxiety. As the doors swung open, she was met with a reality that starkly contrasted her expectations. Richard's private kitchen transcended the ordinary notion of a kitchen. It was a stunning creation, featuring elegant marble countertops, sleek glass shelves, and a grand island at its heart. Richard stood there, arms crossed and leaning against the counter, patiently awaiting her arrival. Certainly took a while, didn't it? I lost my way 3 times, yet I still arrived. He let out a soft laugh and waved his hand toward the array of ingredients laid out on the counter. All right, let's find out if you really have the skills in the kitchen. You didn't evaluate that prior to bringing me on board? I believe that would be an unwise choice for the business. Could be, but if it doesn't meet expectations, I'll have to let you go and proceed from there. Layla squinted her eyes in concentration. Was that a test of my skills? That interpretation is certainly valid. She pushed up her sleeves. Very well, let's find out who comes out on the losing end here. Layla gathered the ingredients and began preparing a straightforward yakisoba, precisely as her grandmother had shown her. She sensed Richard's gaze upon her throughout, stirring a hint of unease within her. You're staring too much, she murmured, her hands deftly stirring the vegetables. I am examining the procedure. I find myself questioning whether I'm a chef or a creature in a zoo. He veered sharply. I'm just ensuring that my meal will be enjoyable. Layla sighed in exasperation and concentrated. Yet before long, an issue arose. Engrossed in the dialogue, she inadvertently poured in an excessive amount of soy sauce. The briny scent enveloped her senses, and a surge of anxiety washed over her. Oh dear? Excuse me? Silence. She hurriedly attempted to mend it, yet the harm had already been inflicted. Richard took a plate, dished out a serving, and grasped a pair of chopsticks. He sank his teeth into the morsel, savoring each chew, but soon his expression shifted to one of discontent. Layla paused, her breath caught in her throat. So what's the verdict? Richard gazed at her, allowing a moment of tension to hang in the air. Have you ever visited the sea? Indeed, what is the reason? This contains a similar quantity of salt. Layla let out a frustrated sigh. Fantastic, on the very first day, and I've managed to mess it all up. Richard placed the chopsticks aside. It's a beginner's blunder, yet truthfully, it's still an improvement over many other meals I've had. Layla folded her arms across her chest. Does this mean I successfully passed the test? He chuckled softly. Indeed, but there is one stipulation. Please refrain from causing me harm. There are no guarantees. Moments later, while Layla was tidying up the counter, an unexpected figure entered the kitchen unannounced. A gentleman clad in formal attire, his demeanor serious and resolute. Mr. Stone, may we have a conversation? Richard let out a deep breath. Layla, please wrap things up here and come to my office. She gave a slight nod and observed as the two departed. In the solitude of the kitchen, Layla found herself pondering the events that had just unfolded. In under a day, she transitioned from an ordinary existence to a position at Stone Enterprises, preparing meals for a wealthy and haughty businessman, while skillfully negotiating her salary as if she were a veteran in the field. At that moment, she sensed that this was merely the start of something greater. After completing her task in the kitchen, Layla took a moment to survey her surroundings. The space was immaculate, and she experienced a subtle wave of pride. If anyone had suggested to her that in just a day she would find herself preparing meals in the office of a billionaire, she would have chuckled at the absurdity. Yet, at this moment she had arrived. With her hands dried on the fabric of her apron, she made her way down the lengthy corridor leading to Richard's office. Upon her arrival, she paused before the door that was ajar. Inside, Richard leaned against his desk, arms crossed, as the man in the suit spoke with a grave demeanor. Now is not the moment for diversions, Richard. It's essential to maintain your concentration on the merger with Sterling Group. It's crucial to avoid spending time on hiring street cooks. Layla squinted her eyes in concentration. Street chef? With a firm hand, she swung the door open and entered, her resolve unwavering. If I'm a culinary artist on the streets, then you're merely a corporate professional in an office. It's identical. The man glanced at her, taken aback by the sudden interruption. Who might you be? Richard, the personal chef of your boss, flashed a smile and directed his attention toward her. Layla, allow me to introduce you to Paul, my financial advisor. Layla assessed him from head to toe. So, Paul, is it? Wonderful. Now you can cease referring to me as a street cook. Paul dismissed the comment with a scoff and redirected his attention to Richard. Are you truly giving this the attention it deserves? Richard gave a slight shrug. Her culinary creations surpass those of any five-star establishment in the vicinity. Layla raised her chin defiantly. Paul folded his arms across his chest. All right, so why not present this chef to your business partners? I'm curious to find out if she truly lives up to your praise. Layla's eyes fluttered. Excuse me? Richard gazed at her, mulling over the suggestion. That's actually a pretty good idea. Layla's eyes grew large with surprise. Excuse me, could you clarify that? Paul grinned, content with himself. Tomorrow evening, Richard is scheduled for a business dinner. Why not prepare a meal for the investors? If your skills match his praise, you'll surely leave everyone in awe. If not, I still get paid either way, Layla interjected seamlessly. Richard chuckled. She makes a valid argument. Paul squinted, his gaze intense. Then it found its place. Layla folded her arms across her chest. Am I able to select the menu? Paul paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. Typically, these dinners feature more refined culinary creations. However, my culinary skills were the reason for my hiring, not my adherence to regulations. Richard cast a glance at Paul. I appreciate that. Paul let out a deep breath. Simply ensure that no one falls ill. There are no guarantees. Layla responded with a grin. The following morning, Layla made her way to the Stone Enterprises building, arriving early with a basket brimming with ingredients. Richard discovered her in the kitchen and cast a look at the bags. What is the number of individuals you intend to provide meals for? 6 backers. What about you? So, in essence, 7. However, having additional food is always a wise choice. Richard reached for an apple nestled in the basket and sank his teeth into it. What do we have to choose from? Layla rested against the counter. I came up with an idea that is both straightforward and unforgettable. That resonates with you. We'll begin with shrimp fritters, followed by special fried rice, sweet and sour beef, and yakisoba. Richard arched an eyebrow. Are you really serving yakisoba to the wealthy elite? Layla raised her chin with determination. They will absolutely adore it. Richard let out a soft laugh and sank his teeth into the apple once more. You have a strong will, and I excel in my craft. The evening descended, ushering in the corporate dinner. In the kitchen, Layla was immersed in the art of preparing the dishes when she caught the sound of the first guests arriving. She glanced through the glass and observed elegantly attired men and women conversing in soft whispers. Paul found himself in their midst. As he cast a quick look at the kitchen, a self-satisfied smile crept across his face. Layla let out an exasperated sigh. Richard materialized next to her. Feeling anxious? Who, me? Layla arched an eyebrow. He chuckled. Never. Time will tell. The dinner commenced, and the courses began to emerge from the kitchen. To begin, the perfectly golden and crispy shrimp fritters. Next, the sautéed rice adorned with vibrant vegetables and fragrant herbs. The dish of sweet and sour beef was presented, aromatic and shimmering. And at last, the piping hot yakisoba featuring artisanal noodles and exquisitely sautéed vegetables. Initially, the guests sampled the food with impassive faces. Layla observed quietly, her heart racing. Then the enchantment unfolded. The initial smiles emerged. Exchanges of glances occurred. A throat was cleared, and eyes turned toward Richard. This is quite unexpected. Another investor acknowledged with a nod. This is the best yakisoba I've ever tasted. Paul's expression was as sour as if he had just bitten into a lemon. Richard cast a sidelong glance at Layla from across the room, a smile playing on his lips. I told you, Layla blinked, her surprise evident. She had captivated them entirely. She emerged victorious. For the first time, she recognized that this new job could be more captivating than she had ever envisioned. Layla couldn't shake off the thoughts of the successful business dinner as she stepped into another day at Stone Enterprises. The investor's response was a blend of astonishment and joy. She demonstrated that even the most unpretentious dishes could captivate anyone. The issue was that the company's employees appeared to have taken notice of her as well. Upon stepping into the building, she sensed the weight of numerous gazes upon her. Soft murmurs echoed through the corridors. So we have encountered the enigmatic chef. How did someone like her manage to get in here? I've come to understand that Mr. Stone has taken an interest in her. Layla's eyes grew wide. Curious? What an absurd notion. She hurried along, her fingers clutching the handle of the shopping bag with determination. She had to concentrate on her tasks, rather than getting caught up in rumors. Yet, the moment she entered Richard's secluded kitchen, an intriguing detail seized her focus. The surfaces were strewn with takeout containers from upscale eateries. Gracefully arranged, the dishes adorned the table with an air of sophistication. However, Richard, positioned by the counter, grasped a fork and regarded the food as though he were compelled to consume sand. Layla placed her bag on the ground and folded her arms across her chest. What's happening here? Richard let out a weary sigh and set the fork aside. Paul urged me to sample dishes crafted by the finest chefs in the area to elevate my taste experience. Layla lifted one of the box lids and glanced at the restaurant's name, Le Blanc. Indeed, the establishment that demands $500 for a minuscule plate that resembles mere table adornment. She cast a quick look at the plates, her expression darkening. This appears to be something other than food. It resembles contemporary artistry. Richard let out a soft laugh. At last, a kindred spirit who sees things my way. She grasped a fork and pierced a morsel of meat, artfully adorned with a shimmering gold leaf. She sampled it and grimaced. This has the flavor profile of well-seasoned cardboard. Richard chuckled heartily. Precisely. Layla cast a glance at him, then shifted her gaze to the opulent food boxes, her eyes narrowing in contemplation. You've already enjoyed excellent meals here, and you're willing to let it all slip away just to sample gourmet options? Point the finger at Paul. He desires for me to elevate my preferences. With a dramatic roll of her eyes, Layla began to unpack the bag she had brought along. If it's a discerning palate he seeks, I shall demonstrate the essence of true cuisine. Richard observed her as she set about crafting a plate of fried rice, adorned with chicken and drizzled with a unique sauce. It seems you're preparing a meal merely to make a statement, aren't you? She beamed with delight. Without fail. Before long, the aroma of delicious dishes wafted through the kitchen. Richard remained at the counter, his gaze fixed intently on Layla as she completed the dish. As she set the bowl before him, he showed no signs of reluctance. With a deft grip on the chopsticks, he savored the first bite. He briefly shut his eyes, letting out a soft sigh. This is excellent. Layla folded her arms, a look of contentment on her face. Superior to the pricey meals? Richard grinned mischievously. Unmatched. Just as Layla was about to reply, the kitchen door swung open, revealing a blonde woman in a perfectly tailored suit, striding in with an air of authority. Richard, my dear, I've been searching for you. She paused, her gaze landing on Layla, and an eyebrow arched in curiosity. Who might this be? Richard continued to chew on his fried rice, his gaze fixed elsewhere, completely ignoring the woman beside him. Layla, my personal chef, the blonde woman chuckled with flair. A culinary artist? Could you clarify what you mean? A chef has never been a necessity for you. Layla caught the woman's gaze, that familiar look of someone evaluating her presence in that space. Indeed, he certainly does now, Layla said with a mischievous grin. The blonde appeared taken aback by her audacity. Richard let out a weary sigh and nudged his plate away. Hey Layla, it's Miranda. Is she your former girlfriend? Layla made an assumption. Miranda chuckled once more. Oh my goodness. I remain deeply involved in Richard's life. Layla squinted her eyes in suspicion. Fortunate indeed. Richard rubbed his temple, a clear sign of his fatigue. Miranda, what is it that you desire? With a gentle smile, she rested her hand on his shoulder. Evening meal. This evening at Le Blanc. In a moment reminiscent of the past, Layla bit her lip to stifle a laugh. Richard let out a deep breath. I am scheduled for a meeting, so it will be tomorrow. He cast a glance at Layla, then shifted his gaze to Miranda, letting out another sigh. I now have a personal chef. I prefer to stay in rather than dine out. For a fleeting moment, the brightness in Miranda's smile dimmed, yet she swiftly regained her composure. I trust your new chef possesses remarkable skills, as I find it hard to believe anything could surpass the experience of dining at Le Blanc. Layla rested against the counter. If you're interested, I can craft something unique just for you. Miranda assessed her from head to toe. Oh my, I question your ability to achieve that. Layla beamed with warmth. There's just one path to discovery. Richard suppressed a grin as Miranda shot him a piercing glance. Until next time, Richard. With that, she exited the kitchen, a lingering aroma of luxurious perfume trailing in her wake. Layla glanced over at Richard. Has she consistently behaved this way? Subpar. Wishing you the best of luck. Richard let out a soft laugh and returned to his food. Thank you, I will require it. Layla savored a sip of juice, leaning against the counter, her gaze fixed on Richard as he completed his meal. She remained perplexed by him. He was a billionaire, enveloped by those seeking advantage, existing in a realm entirely distinct from hers. Yet, in some way, he appeared to be just like everyone else. That posed a dilemma, as the more ordinary he appeared, the more Layla sensed the necessity of maintaining her defenses. It was wiser to remain detached. It was merely a position, or so she repeatedly reassured herself. The following day, Layla entered Richard's office with an unexpected sense of calmness. In a matter of days, she had seamlessly adjusted to the unusual rhythm of preparing meals for an eccentric billionaire while navigating the cautious glances of the staff. However, she was taken aback to discover Richard and Paul engaged in a fervent debate so early in the day. This is absurd, Richard shouted, his hand crashing down on the desk. That seems like an intriguing challenge, Richard said, a faint smile playing on his lips as he crossed his arms. Layla paused at the threshold, clutching a bag filled with fresh ingredients. Am I intruding on something significant? Paul let out a deep sigh, rubbing his hand across his face, a clear sign of his frustration. You should convey to him directly that this idea is absurd. Layla cast a disapproving glance at Richard. What is it at this moment? Richard gestured towards the newspaper spread out on the desk. A charity food event showcased the talents of some of the city's finest chefs. Paul believes I lack the ability to triumph in this cooking competition. Layla stared, her eyes wide with astonishment. Are you interested in joining in? Richard offered a faint smile. Why not indeed? Paul let out an exasperated sigh. As a CEO, your role is distinct from that of a chef. Layla folded her arms and glared intently. Richard, are you capable of cooking an egg? He inclined his head. I prepared instant noodles on one occasion. Paul raised his hands in frustration. Clearly, he is at a disadvantage. Layla bit her lip, stifling a laugh that threatened to escape. In that case, I recommend he finds an excellent mentor. Richard gazed at her. Are you suggesting that you would like to instruct me? She simply shrugged her shoulders. As long as you assure me that the kitchen will remain intact. The following days unfolded in a whirlwind of disorder. Layla soon realized that Richard Stone, the man behind billions in investments, was utterly inept in the kitchen. During his initial foray into cooking a steak, he almost ignited the pan. What is the reason for all this smoke? He let out a cough, gesturing with his hand in the air. Because you raised the temperature too much, Layla declared, snatching the pan from him. During his second attempt, he attempted to chop onions and inadvertently sliced his own finger. That hurts. Goodness, you pose a risk to your own well-being. For the third lesson, Layla chose to impart a straightforward skill, making a sandwich. Yet somehow, even that went awry. It's not acceptable to leave just half a jar of mayonnaise, Richard. However, I have a fondness for mayonnaise. Paul, who sometimes monitored their advancement, consistently departed with a shake of his head. This is bound to end in chaos. Layla, on the other hand, was resolute. He may be a mess at the moment, but improvement is on the horizon. Richard lifted an eyebrow in curiosity. Do you really believe in me that much? She wore a sly grin. No, but I enjoy a good challenge. At last, the much-anticipated day of the event had come. The hall buzzed with the presence of celebrated chefs and powerful business figures. The media scrutinized every nuance, while the judges were keen to savor the creations of the contestants. Richard donned a pristine apron, and even with his limited experience, he exuded an unexpected air of confidence. Layla lingered in the shadows, observing with a blend of unease and satisfaction. And so, the contest commenced. The contestants were given a full hour to craft a unique culinary creation. Richard seized his ingredients with a fierce resolve and began the culinary process. Layla paused, her breath caught in her throat. Was he still a mess? Indeed, in recent days he has shown notable progress. She observed him as he sliced the vegetables, deliberate in his movements yet careful enough to avoid any mishaps. She observed him as he meticulously prepared the sauce, intent and careful not to waste a single ingredient. She observed as he arranged the dish with meticulous care, ensuring the mayonnaise was just right. As the clock struck its final moment, the dishes were unveiled before the judges. Layla nibbled on her lip. The judges sampled each entry, whispering to one another in quiet deliberation. At last, they arrived at Richard's plate. The room was enveloped in silence as a judge lifted a fork and savored a bite. The second judge followed suit. And the third one. Layla paused, her breath caught in her throat. Then one of the judges cleared his mouth and turned his gaze toward Richard. Mr. Stone, I must confess, the tension in the air was nearly overwhelming. This is unexpectedly delightful. Layla exhaled, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. Paul, observing from afar, opened his eyes wide. But how is that possible? The second judge inclined his head in acknowledgement. The harmony of tastes, the mouthfeel, absolutely remarkable. Richard offered a subtle smile and cast a glance at Layla, who responded with a casual thumbs up. As the final results were revealed, Richard found himself without victory. However, he finished in the runner-up position. For a CEO who had never set foot in a kitchen, that was truly a remarkable achievement. As the event concluded, Richard made his way to Layla, a contented smile gracing his face. So, instructor, did I perform well? Her lips curved into a smile. You've truly excelled. He advanced with purpose. I have a question that's been on my mind. Layla folded her arms across her chest. What is it exactly? Richard inclined his head, deep in contemplation. What do you think about starting a restaurant together? Layla blinked, taken aback. Excuse me? He grinned. I mean it. Your cuisine is extraordinary. Honestly, I'm beginning to find pleasure in this. Layla gazed at him, attempting to discern whether he was being serious or playful. Yet, from the sparkle in Richard's eyes, she understood he was not. For the first time, she began to ponder. Perhaps this wasn't merely the conclusion of a trial. Perhaps this marked the dawn of a grander journey. Following the cooking event, Layla believed her life would return to its usual rhythm. Ever since Richard proposed the idea of opening a restaurant together, her thoughts had been in a whirlwind. What? A partnership with a billionaire? It felt like a punchline waiting to be delivered. However, upon her arrival at the office that morning, she came to the unsettling realization that Richard was not joking. At the center of the expansive conference table lay a pile of documents. Good morning, culinary instructor. Richard welcomed with a cunning grin. Layla examined the papers intently, her eyes narrowing with focus. What is this? Richard folded his arms across his chest. Possible sites for the eatery. Layla's eyes fluttered. Are you serious about wanting to open a restaurant together? He drew out a chair and settled into it, gently tapping the papers. I not only have the desire to, but I've also begun my search for the finest locations. She released a tentative chuckle. Richard, this is absolutely wild. I'm simply someone who picked up the art of creating delicious meals from my grandmother. He gave a nonchalant shrug. Here I am, a billionaire with no culinary experience, almost igniting the kitchen while attempting to fry a steak. That seems like a solid equilibrium. Layla couldn't believe what she was hearing. It seems you might be a bit lost in your approach, don't you think? Richard beamed with delight. I'm convinced that every successful investment begins with a solid strategy. Indeed, I possess one. With a soft sigh, she drew a chair closer and settled beside him. All right, let's say I go along with this wild notion. What location do you have in mind for this restaurant? Richard opened a document and indicated the locations within it. There are 3 possibilities before me. One located in the heart of downtown, another nestled in an upscale neighborhood, and a third positioned close to your village. Layla stood still. Close to my village? Richard gave a slight nod. I believed it would be an excellent opportunity to uplift your community. Honestly, there's something incredibly enticing about homemade food. She regarded him with a wary gaze. Did this originate from you or was it Paul's concept? Richard chuckled. My own. Paul believes that investing beyond the commercial center is a misstep. However, I hold a different opinion. Layla bit her lip, pondering the gravity of the situation. Is this for real? Absolutely. She paused, gathering her thoughts in silence. This presents an extraordinary chance, yet it also entails significant risk. Richard observed her pause and rested his elbows on the table. What's preventing you from moving forward? Layla let out a deep breath. My grandmother. I can't bear the thought of leaving her by herself in the restaurant. Richard inclined his head. Then take her to the new restaurant. Layla's eyes grew large with surprise. You've presented it in such an effortless manner. Is it not? She excels in the kitchen. You are as well. It would be a venture for the family. Layla found herself at a loss for words. Richard beamed with delight. Let's go, Layla. What is there to lose? She inhaled deeply. That's acceptable, but I would like to have equal say in the decisions regarding the restaurant. Agreed. And no exorbitant costs. I desire it to be accessible to all. Richard arched an eyebrow. Your negotiation skills are truly impressive. Layla beamed. Your teachings have been invaluable to me. As soon as Layla stepped out of the office, she hurried home to share the news with her grandmother. Upon entering the quaint kitchen of Sabor Oriental, she discovered the elderly woman serenely folding aprons. You won't believe what I've just discovered, Grandma. The woman lifted her gaze and offered a smile. What is it, Layla? She drew a chair closer and settled into it. Richard is interested in starting a restaurant venture alongside me. Are you with me? Her grandmother blinked several times, taken aback. The affluent individual you are employed by? Layla nodded with enthusiasm. Indeed, he intends to establish it close to the village. The elderly woman smiled gently as she continued to fold the aprons. Is this something you desire? Layla paused, enveloped in silence for a moment. I believe that's the case, but it hinges on your willingness to join me. Her grandmother let out a soft laugh. My dear, I may be past the age for launching a new restaurant, but your support is essential to me. This establishment thrives solely due to your presence. Her grandmother grasped her hands gently. I will always stand by you, Layla, but now is the moment for you to create your own narrative. Layla experienced a constriction in her chest. Her grandmother was indeed correct, and for the first time she understood that perhaps she was prepared. In the days that followed, Richard and Layla began their collaboration on the restaurant project. The conversations were fervent. I seek budget-friendly meals. Layla was adamant, yet Richard stood firm, prioritizing quality above all else. The discussion ranged widely, covering topics from the name of the restaurant to the intricacies of the menu. What do you think of Taste of Home? Richard proposed. Layla frowned, rather unoriginal. What are your recommendations? After a brief pause, a smile spread across her face. The essence of the village. Richard contemplated the matter and gave a nod of agreement. I appreciate that. Gradually, everything began to come together, yet there was one unexpected detail that emerged. On the eve of signing the restaurant contract, Layla received an unanticipated visit from Miranda. She arrived at the entrance of Sabor Oriental, a mischievous grin playing on her lips. It's time for a conversation. Layla folded her arms across her chest. I have no words for you. Miranda entered uninvited, her gaze sweeping the room with a hint of contempt. This is the place where you spent your time crafting your craft. That seems reasonable. Layla let out a deep breath. What is it that you desire, Miranda? The blonde approached with a warm smile. I simply wish to caution you to exercise caution. Layla arched an eyebrow. What should I be cautious about? Miranda adjusted her hair with a flourish and let out a deep, theatrical sigh. One might perceive Richard as magnanimous, yet individuals of his ilk rarely act without ulterior motives. Layla tightened her grip. What do you mean by that? Miranda gave a nonchalant shrug. What I'm suggesting is that once he grows weary of this playful charade, he will discard you. Layla felt a surge of anger rise within her. It's amusing, really, as it appears he lost interest in you before you did in him. Miranda's cheeks flushed with a deep crimson hue. "We'll see how long you can hold on, darling." And with that, she departed. Layla experienced a constriction in her chest. She was reluctant to accept any of Miranda's words as truth. But what if it were indeed true? She was unable to deceive her own mind. Richard was a man of immense wealth. She was merely an ordinary cook. What if all of this was merely a fleeting whim for him? The following day, Layla entered Richard's office, resolute in her decision to voice her thoughts. Before she had the chance to speak, he was already inking the restaurant documents. "It's official, we are now partners." Layla took a deep breath. There was no way to retreat. At this point, it could either unfold flawlessly or spiral into chaos. Upon signing the contract, Layla discovered that she was now officially a partner with a billionaire. And as ridiculous as it appeared, she had a restaurant to launch. However, that certainly didn't imply it would be a walk in the park. In contrast, Richard, drawing from his extensive business experience, sought perfection in every detail. "A robust visual identity is essential," he remarked, gazing at the logo options displayed on his computer screen. Layla, positioned opposite him, cradled her face in her hands. "Richard, something that exudes elegance while maintaining a warm and inviting atmosphere. A contemporary vibe infused with a hint of rustic charm." Layla let out a deep breath. Richard finally raised his gaze. "Excuse me?" She folded her arms across her chest. "This is a dining establishment, not a technology firm." Richard inclined his head. "However, branding holds significant value." Layla let out a dramatic sigh. "Is it more significant than the meal?" He offered a sidelong grin. "All right, let's concentrate on the cuisine." Layla inhaled deeply. "Thanks a lot." Just as she began to unwind, Paul strode into the room, carrying a hefty stack of papers. "A situation has arisen that requires our attention." Layla briefly shut her eyes. "Absolutely, we do." Richard grasped the documents. "What has occurred this time?" Paul let out a deep breath. "The property we selected for the restaurant requires immediate repairs, exceeding our initial expectations." Layla's eyes grew wide. "Excuse me?" Paul gave a slight nod. "There were electrical problems, leaks, and, to put it mildly, a pigeon's nest had taken residence in the kitchen." Layla placed her hands atop her head. "This is unbelievable." Richard sifted through the documents, contemplating. "We can resolve this. It may slow things down slightly, but it's certainly manageable." Paul folded his arms across his chest. "It's just going to cost a lot." Layla's eyes grew wide. "What is the cost?" Paul paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. Richard, in contrast, appeared to be unconcerned. "No need to stress over it." Layla struck the table with her hand. "There's no need for concern. Richard, this isn't solely your money. I am here by your side. I must seek the answer." He gazed at her for a brief moment. He seized a pen and hastily scrawled a number on a sheet of paper. Layla grabbed the paper, glanced at the number, and nearly toppled from her chair. "Have you lost your senses?" Richard gave a slight shrug. "This is an essential investment." Layla smacked her forehead in exasperation. "Is it a worthwhile investment? With that amount, Richard, I could purchase a significant portion of the town." Paul, appearing to relish the moment, simply observed. Layla inhaled deeply. "What if we discovered another location?" Richard gave a slight shake of his head. This is indeed the correct location, yet he folded his arms. "Can you place your faith in me?" Layla stood still. He inquired with such gravity. She let out a weary breath. "All right, but if this place ends up failing, I'll be sure to linger around for eternity." Richard chuckled. "That's reasonable." In the days that followed, the restaurant transformed into a bustling construction site. Layla dedicated her days to meticulously managing every detail. And Richard, he made an effort to assist. "Richard, absolutely not. The paint is intended for the walls, not for the counter." "Do you really think so?" "I believe it would add a contemporary flair." Paul observed from a distance, sipping his coffee. "I really ought to bring a camera to capture this moment." Richard hurled a paintbrush in his direction. As the days unfolded, the restaurant gradually started to come into focus. As Layla stepped into the completed space for the first time, her heart raced with excitement. It was genuine. She glanced at Richard, deeply affected. "This is incredible," he beamed. "This marks merely the start of our journey. The upcoming task involves assembling the team." Layla sought out the villagers, those who truly appreciated the essence of home-cooked meals. Richard, conversely, maintained that they required a celebrated culinary expert. "Layla, we require an individual who possesses the necessary expertise. I possess experience. Person possessing credentials." She placed her hands firmly on her hips. "Oh, absolutely, because a diploma really captures the essence of what my grandmother has mastered over half a century." Richard let out a deep breath. "That's not what I intended to convey." Layla folded her arms across her chest. "Allow me to assemble my own team." He arched an eyebrow. "Is that really how confident you are?" Her lips curved into a smile. "I will demonstrate that I am correct." Thus commenced the quest for personnel. Layla made her way directly to her village. "Mr. Pedro, do you still prepare those incredible beans?" "Mrs. Rosa, are you in search of a new opportunity?" "It's unlikely that you will. Do you recall the time you dreamed of becoming a baker?" "I would like to present a proposal." Within a matter of days, her team was fully prepared. As Richard observed the crowd, their puzzled expressions and furrowed brows attempting to unravel the mystery of how a billionaire and a humble village cook became unlikely business partners, a smile crept across his face. Layla gently tapped his shoulder. "I'm sure you've never collaborated with such remarkable individuals." Richard beamed. "We'll find out if they can manage it." The day of the grand opening arrived sooner than Layla had anticipated. The entire town appeared to be aware of the new restaurant. Reporters were positioned outside, prepared to document the occasion. Patrons were forming a queue. And what about Layla? She was in a state of panic. "The sauce is off. The rice has been scorched. Who added sugar to the soy sauce?" Richard entered the kitchen, arms crossed defiantly. "What's happening?" Layla brushed her fingers across her face. "Disorder, that's the current state of affairs." He chuckled softly. "Take a deep breath. Everything is managed perfectly." She cast a frustrated glance in his direction. "What makes you so composed?" Richard seized her shoulders. "Your culinary skills are unmatched in my experience." Layla came to a halt. In that fleeting instant, all her worries faded away. "Until the first order is ready." Thus commenced the beginning. The patrons were delighted by the cuisine. Layla was overwhelmed by the sheer number of compliments she received, almost unable to grasp the reality of it all. Richard observed everything unfold from afar, feeling a sense of contentment. Paul approached him with purpose. "You certainly made a bold move here." Richard offered a subtle smile. "And it was worth it." Paul observed Layla, her laughter ringing out as she attended to a table. "It's more than just the restaurant, isn't it?" Richard shifted his focus. "I'm not quite sure I understand your point." Paul chuckled. "Naturally, that's not the case." After several hours, the restaurant finally shut its doors. Layla sank into a chair, utterly spent. Richard took a seat beside her. "Did you make it through?" She let out a weary breath. "Hardly." He grinned. "Yet you accomplished it." She cast her gaze upon him. In that moment, she understood that her life had irrevocably changed. The restaurant was officially open for business. To Layla's astonishment, it was bustling with activity each day. The queue snaked around the corner, orders flowed in continuously, and patrons departed with smiles of satisfaction. Yet, that also signified the absence of a life for her. "I feel like I'm at the end of my rope." Layla collapsed into a chair at the back of the kitchen after a long day. Richard, comfortably sipping his coffee, glanced at her and chuckled softly. "Do you recall that you desired this?" She raised her chin, hair tousled, apron splattered, and sheer fatigue etched across her features. "I was looking for a dining establishment. I had no desire to turn into a mindless creature." Richard arched an eyebrow. "The answer is straightforward." "Excuse me?" "Bring on additional team members." Layla's eyes fluttered open. "What is happening?" Richard folded his arms across his chest. I've secured additional support. Could you clarify what you mean? Just then, the kitchen door swung open, and 3 fresh faces stepped inside. Layla was taken aback. May I ask who you are? Richard savored another sip of his coffee. The team we've assembled. She rose to her feet. You brought on new team members without informing me? Richard beamed. View it as a blessing. She placed her hands firmly on her hips. Richard, I am your collaborator in this venture. He shrugged, indicating that you lack the ability to make decisions independently. You expressed your fatigue. The issue has been resolved. Layla prepared to voice her disagreement, yet he made a valid observation. The fresh recruits appeared competent, and she genuinely required assistance. All right, you got this round. Richard beamed with triumph. As usual, Layla let out an exasperated sigh. Don't become accustomed to it. With the team bolstered, the restaurant operated with heightened efficiency. However, this brought about a fresh challenge: notoriety. In the past, it was merely an unassuming eatery. At this moment, influencers began to make their appearance. Notable individuals were sharing their thoughts on the meals. And in an instant, Layla emerged as a prominent figure. This wasn't something I requested, she exclaimed in excitement upon discovering a video of her gaining widespread attention online. Richard appeared to be entertained once more. What has transpired now? She gestured towards her phone. With over 1 million views, Richard couldn't help but smile. Well done. She glared at him, exasperation evident in her eyes. It lacks humor. I'm merely a chef. He folded his arms across his chest. And now you've become a renowned chef. Layla rubbed her temples gently. I simply aimed to prepare a meal, not to achieve fame. Richard approached, gently took her phone, and offered a warm smile. Do you realize something? This is a positive development. What do you think of that? He gazed into her eyes. It signifies that individuals appreciate your work. Layla began to speak, but hesitated. For the simple reason that, at his core, he was correct. As the restaurant flourished, it felt as though everything was finally aligning perfectly. Then, one day, Miranda returned. She strolled into the restaurant with an air of confidence, donning sunglasses and high heels. Good morning, my dears. Layla sensed a churn in her stomach. Richard, stationed at the register, wore a frown. What is it that you desire, Miranda? She beamed with delight. I just wanted to check in and see how everyone is faring after all the success. Layla folded her arms across her chest. Your presence always carries significance. Miranda let out a deep, theatrical sigh. Well, since you brought it up, she retrieved a golden invitation from her purse. I'm putting together a special event, and I would be thrilled if you could handle the catering. Layla's eyes fluttered. Excuse me? Miranda beamed. I'm aware that we've had our disagreements, but at the end of the day, it's all about the business. Isn't it? Layla gazed at Richard. He appeared to be untrustworthy. What type of occasion are we discussing here? Miranda smiled, concealing her true intentions. An evening dedicated to philanthropy. Many influential individuals are expected to attend. This could be an excellent chance for you. Layla paused, for in spite of it all, it wasn't an unwise notion. However, she also sensed that Miranda was not to be trusted. Her gaze fell upon Richard. What are your thoughts? He let out a deep breath. It seems unwise to place my trust in her. Miranda let out an exasperated sigh. For heaven's sake, Richard, I'm presenting you with a remarkable chance. Layla paused for a moment longer but ultimately decided, all right, we'll go ahead with the catering. Miranda beamed with satisfaction. Excellent. Richard folded his arms across his chest. If you attempt anything, take it easy, my dear. Success is on the horizon. And with that, she departed. Richard cast his gaze upon Layla. Do you really believe this is the right choice? She inhaled deeply. I understand she has ulterior motives, but if this contributes to the restaurant's growth, it's a risk worth taking. Richard let out a deep breath. Your courage exceeds my expectations. Layla beamed. What you've witnessed is just the beginning. In the days that followed, Layla and her team dedicated themselves to meticulously preparing the buffet for Miranda's event. Yet, there was an unsettling sensation in the air. On the day of the event, as they arrived to prepare the food, Layla observed a concerning detail. The servers appeared anxious. The organizers deliberately averted their gazes from her. Then, Richard received a phone call. He responded and instantly went white as a sheet. "Excuse me?" Layla faced him. "What's happening?" Richard gazed at her, his eyes shadowed with fury. "Miranda arranged everything for us." Layla sensed her heart pounding in her chest. "Could you clarify what you mean?" Richard inhaled deeply. "She informed all the guests that the dishes served from our restaurant were prepared by a different chef." Layla's eyes grew large with surprise. "Excuse me?" "Essentially, she's taking our food while asserting that it was created by a rival." Layla sensed the fury swell within her. "That serpent." Richard surveyed the team. "Attention everyone. Please cease serving immediately." The servers shared knowing looks. Layla exhaled sharply. "No, I will take care of this on my own." Without a moment's hesitation, she stepped onto the stage, took hold of the microphone, and declared, loud and clear, "Good evening, everyone. I trust the dinner is to your liking. I simply wish to clarify a point." Miranda, positioned at the rear of the room, turned ashen. "Is all this food really here?" "The preparation was done by the establishment, Sabors de Vila, created by my team and I." A soft murmur filled the air. The visitors exchanged glances. Miranda made an attempt to step in. "This is an error." However, Layla didn't allow her the opportunity. "If anyone has any uncertainties, please come to the kitchen, and I'll prepare a dish right here for you." The audience burst into enthusiastic applause. Miranda trembled with fury. What about Richard? He merely offered a smile. "This girl is truly remarkable." That evening, Layla and Richard departed the gathering triumphant. Miranda attempted to undermine their stability. Yet, in the end, she became the punchline. For the first time, Layla understood that she and Richard formed an exceptional partnership. The restaurant's fame was escalating following Miranda's mishap at the event. The name Sabors de Vila had become ubiquitous, appearing in newspapers and flooding social media feeds. Layla found it impossible to stroll through the city without being recognized by someone. "Greetings, it's the chef from Sabors de Vila." A woman gestured towards Layla in the market. "You absolutely must share that recipe with me?" Another customer exclaimed with enthusiasm. With a bag brimming with ingredients, Layla offered a shy smile before quickly making her exit. Richard strolled alongside her, a look of pure enjoyment on his face, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. "Your recognition is growing. I never sought fame." With a sigh of annoyance, Layla dropped a tomato into the bag. Yet, she let out a heavy sigh, realizing the moment had passed. "This is your fault," Richard arched an eyebrow. "Is it mine?" Layla directed her finger towards him. "You pulled me into this realm of the affluent, and now I'm trapped here." He chuckled. "Did I pull you along? Or did you choose to join me?" She began to voice her disagreement, yet fell silent, for she knew in her heart that he was correct. As the restaurant thrived, Richard felt it was the perfect moment to elevate his ambitions. "I would like you to prepare a meal for a special dinner," Layla said with a frown. "What do you mean by unique?" He grinned. "It will be an exclusive business dinner, attended by only a few chosen individuals." Layla blinked. "Am I preparing a meal for a more affluent crowd?" Essentially, she let out a sigh. "I'm uncertain if my heart can endure this any longer." Richard chuckled. "Everything will turn out all right." The dinner took place on the uppermost level of an opulent hotel. Layla walked in with her ingredients, instantly sensing her discomfort in the surroundings. She whispered to herself, convinced that she was out of place in this world. However, the moment she entered the kitchen, the atmosphere shifted completely. That was her sanctuary. That was her true self. As she prepared the meal, Richard engaged the guests with his charm. The entrepreneurs were captivated by the restaurant's expansion. "You've discovered a true gem, Richard," one of them remarked. "That girl possesses remarkable talent," another remarked. Richard merely smiled. "I understand." As the dishes were presented, A hush fell over the guests. An older man with gray hair was the first to speak. "This is truly remarkable." The rest acknowledged with a nod. From afar, Layla observed, a gentle warmth blossoming in her chest. She accomplished it, yet things did not unfold as anticipated. Upon Layla's return to the kitchen, her eyes fell upon an unexpected sight that seemed entirely out of place. "What are you up to?" A server was grasping a dubious bottle, attempting to add something to the sauce. Layla dashed towards him and halted him immediately. The man's eyes widened, and he dashed away. "Return here," she yelled. Yet he had already departed. Layla gazed at the bottle, a chill running down her spine. An attempt was made to undermine the dinner. She hurried toward Richard. "It's time for a conversation." He perceived the gravity in her tone and gave a nod. What transpired? She revealed the bottle to him. Someone attempted to incorporate this into the sauce. Richard's gaze grew shadowy. "Who is it?" Layla let out a deep breath. "I couldn't make out the details, but he took off the moment he spotted me." Richard inhaled deeply. "I will handle it." For the first time, Layla noticed a change in his gaze. He was truly enraged. The dinner concluded on a pleasant note, yet Richard remained unsettled. He was determined to uncover the identity of the person responsible for the sabotage. Layla, in stark contrast, was utterly drained. "All I desire is a week of uninterrupted sleep." Richard observed her for a moment and, almost instinctively, laid his hand over hers. "Your performance today was truly commendable." Her cheeks flushed with color. "Thanks a lot." He grinned. "It seems we've earned ourselves a moment of respite." Layla chuckled softly. "At last, a reasonable thought from you." The following day emerged with an unusual vibrancy in the atmosphere. Layla arrived early at the restaurant, the echoes of the previous night's dinner still heavy on her mind. Her mind was consumed by the unsettling thought that someone had attempted to undermine the meal. What if she had missed it altogether? If that dinner had been spoiled, the restaurant's reputation could have been tarnished, and all that she and Richard had built would have been lost. This must not occur again. She entered the kitchen and began to arrange everything meticulously. Just as she was about to dive into her tasks, Richard showed up. "It's time for a conversation." Layla, continuing to fiddle with the ingredients, let out a sigh. "If this concerns last night's dinner, I'm already feeling quite overwhelmed." Richard folded his arms across his chest. "I understand, but there's an important detail you should be aware of." Layla scowled. "What is it exactly?" He retrieved his phone from his pocket and angled the screen in her direction. Layla sensed a sudden lurch in her stomach. "What is this all about?" On the screen, a shocking headline captured attention. A successful restaurant owner entangled in a fraud scandal, with whispers suggesting the head chef is merely a charlatan. In the photograph, Layla's face was captured. Her eyes grew large with surprise. "But what is it? Who is the author of this?" Richard inhaled deeply. "I'm delving into the matter, but it appears that there are forces at play attempting to undermine us." Layla sensed a whirl of confusion enveloping her mind. Initially, they attempted to undermine the food, and now this. Richard gave a slight nod. "I anticipated that our progress would ruffle some feathers among competitors, but this has crossed the line." Layla tightened her grip. "This is utterly absurd. I put in more effort in this restaurant than anyone else. How can they claim I'm a fraud?" Richard let out a deep breath. "I will handle it." "In what way?" He gazed at her with unwavering intensity. "By providing this individual precisely what they desire." Layla's eyes fluttered. "Are you out of your mind? Have faith in me." Layla folded her arms across her chest. "Your trust means a lot to me. However, should this plan not succeed, you will be responsible for washing all the dishes in the restaurant for an entire month." Richard beamed with delight. "Agreed." In the days that followed, Richard embarked on a journey that defied all expectations. He declared an open event inviting everyone to the restaurant to witness Layla's live cooking demonstration. "Do you really believe this is the right choice?" she inquired with a hint of anxiety. Richard gave a slight nod. "If they dare to doubt your abilities, We will prove them mistaken. Layla nibbled on her lip. This has the potential to take a turn for the worse. Richard beamed. Or it could turn out exceptionally well. The restaurant was bustling with activity on the day of the event. Reporters, trendsetters, longtime patrons, and newcomers. All eyes were on Layla, eager to discover whether she possessed genuine culinary skills, or if she was merely an imposter. Layla felt a flutter of anxiety, yet Richard's hand on her shoulder offered a sense of reassurance. Simply carry on as you usually do. With a steadying inhale, she made her way to the kitchen. The subsequent events unfolded into a true work of art. Layla poured her heart into her cooking. Each dish emerged perfectly crafted, leaving customers in awe of her effortless ability to conjure new flavors. As the event concluded, every reporter was lauding her remarkable abilities. Her talent is truly remarkable. The cuisine is absolutely delightful. Absolutely not a scam. Richard beamed, content with the outcome. I mentioned it to you. Layla, weary from her day, sank into a chair and released a deep sigh of relief. That was the most terrifying experience I've ever had. Richard chuckled. Yet it proved to be worthwhile. Layla beamed. Indeed, it truly was. Following the demonstration event, Layla emerged as a genuine sensation in town. Sabors de Vila was perpetually bustling, and her name graced numerous food blogs. Yet Layla understood that in the realm of commerce, the waters were not always calm. This is progressing too quickly, Richard. In the kitchen, she and Richard busied themselves as the staff meticulously arranged the orders. Isn't that a positive outcome? He inquired, arms crossed. With a soft sigh, Layla stirred the yakisoba sauce. It is, yet I can't shake this feeling that something ominous is on the horizon. Richard chuckled heartily. You seem to be overthinking things. Perhaps. Ever since that individual attempted to ruin the dinner, I find it impossible to unwind. Richard's demeanor shifted to one of gravity. If that's the case, I will uncover who is responsible for this. Layla cast her gaze upon him and let out a soft sigh. Exercise caution to avoid becoming overly entangled. Richard offered her a faint smile. It's past the point for that. That evening, Richard sought out one of his reliable associates, Samuel Lopez, a private investigator. I require details about who is attempting to undermine the restaurant. Samuel arched an eyebrow. What piques your curiosity about this? Richard paused briefly, then replied, as it impacts me as well. Samuel beamed. Okay, I'll look into it and see what I can discover. 2 days later, the announcement arrived. Richard, I've uncovered the identity of the person responsible for this. He picked up the phone immediately. Proceed. Miranda. Richard frowned. Naturally, it's her. She found it impossible to come to terms with the embarrassment from the previous event. Now she has a grander vision. Richard sensed a tumultuous wave in his stomach. What are her intentions? Samuel let out a deep breath. She is attempting to purchase the restaurant. Richard fell into a moment of silence. Then he whispered, she's completely lost her mind. As Layla tidied up the kitchen, Richard entered, his face etched with concern. It's time for a conversation. She gazed up at him. This situation is far from ideal. Miranda is in the process of acquiring the restaurant. Layla stood still. Excuse me? She aims to bring you down. The most effective approach is to remove the restaurant from your possession. Layla sensed a surge of anger. She will never achieve success. Richard beamed. That's precisely the response I was hoping for. Yet, beneath the surface, he was aware. Miranda was determined not to back down. The following morning, Layla was presented with an astonishing proposal. A gentleman in formal attire entered the restaurant, presenting her with a contract. Miss Miranda is eager to acquire this restaurant at a fair price. Layla grasped the paper and examined the figures. Is she joking with me? The gentleman carefully repositioned his spectacles. No, ma'am. She is convinced that this proposal is just. Layla ripped the contract to shreds. Inform her that I cannot be bought. The man paused for a brief moment, then gathered the scattered pieces of paper and departed. Richard arrived not long after. What was it that he desired? Layla folded her arms across her chest. Miranda attempted to negotiate my exit. Richard beamed with delight. So what actions did you take? Layla raised her chin with determination. What are your thoughts? He chuckled. Each day you continue to astonish me. Yet Miranda persisted. The following day, yet another shocking news story emerged. Sabors de Vila has shut its doors due to health code violations. Layla's heart sank. This cannot possibly be true. Richard was acutely aware that it was a trap. She desires the restaurant to shut down. Layla would not concede to it. Then we shall engage in battle. Richard beamed with delight. Now you're resonating with my thoughts. The news struck with explosive force. Layla gazed at the headline, her eyes fixed on it as though she hoped the words would vanish from the screen. Sabors de Vila has shut its doors due to health code violations. This is absurd, she exclaimed, hurling her phone onto the table. The establishment has successfully cleared every inspection. Richard, positioned beside her, examined the official document provided by the inspectors. This is an arrangement. It seems that Miranda may have engaged in some underhanded dealings. Layla's anger surged within her. She aims to dismantle all that we've created. Richard stood with his arms crossed, lost in contemplation. If she seeks a battle, then a battle she shall have. The following morning, Layla and Richard headed directly to the health inspection office. Upon arrival, they encountered a man clad in a gray suit, his expression flat and devoid of emotion. Dear Miss Layla and Mr. Stone, I regret to inform you that Sabors de Vila is currently closed until further notice. Layla bent over the desk, seething with anger. What is the basis for that? The man perused the report with a thoughtful expression. Signs of outdated products, unsanitary conditions in the kitchen, and a pest problem were observed. That is not true. Layla struck the table with her hand. Richard entered, maintaining his composure. We seek to examine the proof. The inspector let out a weary sigh and slid a few photographs across the table toward them. Layla picked up the pictures, and a wave of unease washed over her. Shelves cluttered with outdated items, pots stained with remnants of soil, and to top it all off, a picture of a cockroach lurking in the corner of the pantry. This can't be, Layla whispered. Richard examined the photos meticulously, analyzing each one in detail. These images are fabricated. The inspector lifted his brows in surprise. What makes you confident in that? Richard indicated a specific detail in the pantry photo. This particular seasoning has been absent from the market for the past 2 years. The inspector paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Layla rose to her feet. This clearly indicates that evidence was deliberately planted to implicate us. The man let out a weary breath. The complaint has been officially submitted. To overturn the decision, a fresh inspection will be required. Layla insisted on conducting a new inspection immediately. The inspector gave a slow, deliberate shake of his head. Regrettably, a bureaucratic procedure is in place. The upcoming inspection is scheduled to take place in 2 weeks' time. Layla's eyes grew large with surprise. Is it really just 2 weeks? Richard tightened his grip, his fists balling up in a surge of emotion. This is not mere chance. Miranda is orchestrating everything behind the scenes. Layla experienced a tightness in her throat. 2 weeks of closure for the restaurant resulted in lost patrons, financial setbacks, and, more critically, potential harm to a reputation that could be beyond repair. Suddenly, a thought flickered in her mind. She cast her gaze upon Richard. If we can't open the restaurant, then let's take the restaurant experience directly to the customers. The following morning, Layla and Richard found themselves in the kitchen, crafting delightful takeout meals. If we can't have individuals visit us, we'll deliver the food to them. Richard beamed. Your thought process resonates with me. The entire restaurant team was mobilized. Within a matter of hours, a makeshift delivery system was established. Let's share this on social media, Layla exclaimed, reaching for her phone. Richard seized his phone and swiftly tapped out a message. Shortly thereafter, the post was published. Though Sabors de Vila may no longer be open, our culinary delights continue to reach your table. Place your order today and savor the taste of homemade goodness no matter your location. The patrons erupted with excitement. Do you believe this will be effective? Layla inquired with a sense of urgency. Richard beamed with delight. Are you questioning my abilities? Without fail. Prepare to be astonished. And it succeeded. The requests continued to pour in. Within mere hours, the kitchen transformed into a delightful chaos. A beautiful mess in every sense. Layla and the team dashed about, meticulously packing orders, coordinating deliveries, arranging pies, and ensuring every detail was just right. We're completely swamped, one of the staff members exclaimed. Is that an issue or a resolution? Layla replied with a chuckle. Amidst the turmoil, the reality was that the strategy was unfolding as intended. However, Miranda was determined not to let it slip away. On that very night, a fresh headline emerged. The shuttered eatery persists in its unlawful operations. Layla clutched her phone tightly, a frustrated sigh escaping her lips. This woman knows no bounds. Richard snatched her phone. Allow me to take care of this. He reached out to Samuel, the private investigator. Discover how Miranda is obtaining this information and keep me updated. Layla folded her arms across her chest. She has someone embedded, Richard acknowledged. And we shall uncover the identity. The following morning, an employee of the restaurant was discovered in the act of capturing clandestine photographs. Layla burst out of the kitchen, seething with anger. What are you up to? The man gulped, concealing his phone. Richard snatched the device from his grasp and glanced at the messages exchanged with Miranda. Understood. The employee attempted to escape, but Richard obstructed the way out. Speak up now, or we will have no choice but to involve the authorities. The man paused, grappling with his thoughts, before finally revealing the whole truth. Miranda compensated me to relay some information. She was curious about your activities and aimed to undermine your intentions. Layla shut her eyes, striving to rein in her frustration. Richard fixed his gaze on the man. Gather your belongings and leave. The man dashed away. Layla glanced over at Richard. This indicates that Miranda is already aware of our resistance. Richard gave a slight nod. Now that the truth is revealed, it's time to take action. Richard lifted the receiver and dialed a number. Hello, I could use a little help. On the other end, Samuel responded, What are you thinking? Richard beamed with delight. It's time to reveal the truth about Miranda. The following day, a fresh piece was published on the internet. Entrepreneur entangled in a plot to undermine competing eatery. The piece presented all the evidence of Miranda's cunning influence. Communications, financial exchanges, illicit payments. Miranda found herself ensnared in the very trap she had set. As the afternoon drew to a close, Layla and Richard found themselves summoned to a meeting with the regulatory agency. With this fresh insight, we will promptly resume operations at Sabors de Vila. Layla's eyes brimmed with tears. Is that so? The inspector wore a smile. Is that so? Layla gazed at Richard and, in a spontaneous moment, embraced him warmly. He felt a rush of surprise, yet instinctively wrapped his arms around her in return. We accomplished it. That evening, the restaurant welcomed back eager patrons, forming a line that stretched outside. Layla gazed at it, a smile spreading across her face. This is truly astonishing. Richard slipped his hands into his pockets. This is the outcome of your efforts. She cast her gaze upon him. He cast a glance over his shoulder at her. For a brief instant, silence enveloped the room until Layla broke it with a nervous chuckle. If you believe this implies complimentary meals, you're mistaken. Richard chuckled. You truly are a challenge. Yet, beneath the surface, he was undeniably captivated by her. The reopening of Sabors de Vila proved to be an immense triumph. From the break of dawn, devoted and inquisitive patrons lined up along the sidewalk, excited to sample the culinary creations that had captured the community's attention. Within the kitchen, Layla orchestrated every detail with meticulous care, all while wearing a warm smile. After a long stretch of uncertainty, she finally sensed a grip on her life. Let's enjoy ourselves with those who merely skim through the comments. Leave a comment with Pepsi. Only those who reach this point will truly comprehend. Now, let us return to the narrative. Richard, however, observed everything from afar, his expression leaving the staff puzzled. One of the cooks remarked on his peculiar behavior. Perhaps he's smitten with the boss, another quipped, chuckling. Perhaps he has something up his sleeve. Truly he was. As the night wore on, Richard bided his time, patiently observing as the last customers departed and the staff completed their duties, before finally approaching Layla. In the kitchen, she busied herself with cleaning the counter, unaware of the presence drawing near. I would like to have a conversation with you. She cast a glance at Richard, her eyebrow arching in curiosity. Can I decline this new investment opportunity now or later? He chuckled, folding his arms across his chest. This moment transcends mere commerce. Layla wiped her hands on her apron and rested against the counter. So what is it exactly? Richard inhaled deeply. I would love to take you out for dinner. She blinked several times. Shall we have dinner? So, are we talking about outside the restaurant? Absolutely. Layla tilted her head, her expression laced with doubt. I've never received an invitation to dinner from you before. Every experience begins with a first. She fixed her gaze on him for a moment, attempting to unravel the mystery of his intentions. Yet, there was an intensity in his gaze, a resolute tone in his voice, that suggested this was more than merely a dinner. Layla inhaled deeply and, defying all odds, responded. Understood. The eatery they selected was among the most opulent in the city. Layla surveyed her surroundings, anxiety creeping in. I sense that I'm under scrutiny. Richard beamed with delight. You're there, but just overlook it. She let out an exasperated sigh. Simple for you to express. This is the environment in which you were born. He inclined his head slightly. And where would you like to go? Layla paused to reflect. I enjoy environments that allow me to express my true self, where the state of my clothes or the scent of my hands is of no concern to anyone. Richard remained quiet for a moment. I appreciate that quality in you. Layla sensed a warm flush spread across her cheeks. Excuse me? How you embrace your uniqueness. Your fearless embrace of your true self is inspiring. She released a tentative chuckle. If that's meant as a compliment, I'll be sure to remember it. Such occurrences are rare. Richard chuckled, lifting his wine glass with a playful air. You might want to jot down more notes, as I have a lot more to share with you. Layla sensed her heart quicken. What was the reason behind his way of speaking? And, even more crucially, why did it evoke emotions in her that she believed she shouldn't experience? The dinner unfolded beautifully, perhaps too beautifully. They conversed with an intensity that suggested nothing else held significance, as if the entirety of existence condensed into that singular moment. However, chaos ensued as they were departing the restaurant. Across the street, a gathering of reporters was poised, eagerly anticipating their arrival. Devices, illumination, audio capture, and incisive inquiries. Mr. Stone, is Miss Layla your latest romantic interest? Could this dinner be considered a romantic date? Does this imply that you've lost interest in women from high society? Layla stood still. Richard maintained his calm, yet his gaze grew icy. He wrapped his arm around Layla's waist and swiftly led her to the car. Disregard them, yet it was utterly unavoidable. They captivated the entire city, drawing everyone's gaze. At this moment, the path ahead was irrevocably set. The following morning, the online world erupted. CEO Richard Stone spotted enjoying a romantic dinner with a local girl. Layla felt a surge of anxiety wash over her as she caught sight of it. Excuse me? Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from clients, friends, and even strangers. Is this accurate? Are you seeing someone? When did this occur? She tossed her phone onto the table, her hands sweeping over her face in exasperation. This is a dreadful experience. Suddenly, the phone rang. She responded instinctively. Layla, it was her grandmother. Grandma, allow me to clarify. Do you notice that man? No, I mean yes, but it's not exactly what they're implying. So, what is it really like? Layla found herself at a loss for words. At that precise moment, a knock echoed through the air, resonating from the door. She pivoted and caught sight of Richard. A sense of impending doom washed over her, as if the day was poised to spiral into something even more dismal. Richard folded his arms across his chest. "Have you caught up with the latest headlines?" Layla let out a deep breath. "Certainly, I noticed. My phone just keeps going. My grandma is on the verge of losing her patience with me." He let out a deep breath. "I apologize. I regret to say that this is damaging my reputation." He arched an eyebrow. "Is it your reputation or your heart that matters more?" Layla stood still. "Excuse me? I believe you're more afraid of your own emotions than of others' opinions." Words failed her. Then he moved in closer. "I have a fondness for you. My feelings for you, Layla, run deep. I believe you have feelings for me as well." She sensed the world whirl around her. "Richard, there's no rush to respond, but I encourage you to reflect on it." Layla found herself in a whirlwind of uncertainty. All she understood was that her heart was in utter disarray. That night, sleep eluded her. She writhed restlessly in bed, gazing at the ceiling, attempting to dismiss the turmoil within her. Yet it proved futile. She found herself adrift. And even more troubling, perhaps she had fallen in love. Layla remained awake throughout the entire night. No matter how fiercely she attempted to banish the thoughts, Richard lingered in her mind. Each word he uttered, each glance he cast her way, every instant he made her feel extraordinary. She wished to dismiss it, to think it was merely a game, yet it was undeniably real. What's even more frustrating, she found it enjoyable, yet voicing that truth felt overwhelmingly daunting. The following morning, Layla resolved to concentrate on her tasks. She reached the restaurant ahead of her usual time, resolute in her effort to distract herself from thoughts of Richard's piercing gaze and the weight of his stone. Yet destiny had other intentions for her. Upon entering the kitchen, her eyes were immediately drawn to a white envelope resting on the counter. Her name was inscribed in elegant script upon it. Her heart raced as she opened the envelope, revealing a note inside. "Do not flee. We need to have a conversation. I'll be waiting for you at the Grand Imperial Hotel at 7 p.m. Richard." Layla felt a flutter in her stomach. He wished to have a conversation? Concerning what topic? And most crucially, is it right for her to leave? The day slipped away in the blink of an eye, and suddenly night was creeping in. Layla gazed at her reflection, filled with uncertainty. A portion of her wished to utterly dismiss that note. Yet the other part was fully aware that she would go, regardless of the circumstances. At 7 in the evening, with a keen sense of purpose, Layla arrived at the Grand Imperial Hotel. As she stepped into the opulent hall, her gaze swept the surroundings, a sense of unease settling within her. At that moment, her gaze fell upon Richard. He stood by a reserved table, clad in a perfectly tailored suit, his expression a blend of seriousness and kindness. With a steadying breath, Layla approached him confidently. "You arrived. I remain uncertain whether it was a misstep." Richard offered a slight smile. "So take a seat and discover for yourself." She sighed dramatically but complied. The waiter brought over 2 glasses of wine, and Layla observed that Richard appeared anxious. That was unusual. "What's the matter?" she inquired. He savored a sip of his wine before he began to speak. "I want to make you an offer," Layla said, her brow furrowing. "If it's another job offer, I want you to choose me instead." Time seemed to freeze. Layla blinked, convinced she must have misheard. "What?" Richard gazed intently into her eyes. "I liked you, Layla, and I don't want to pretend I don't anymore." Her heart raced. "Richard, this doesn't make sense." "It completely resonates. You influence me like no one else ever has. I have no interest in your origins. I am indifferent to the opinions of others. I only care about what we have." Layla felt her emotions surging within her. She yearned to trust him. She hesitated to accept. Yet the fear lingered. "I'm not like the women you're familiar with. I'm unsure how to navigate your world." Richard grasped her hand across the table. I wish for you to remain as you are. I want you just the way you are. Layla felt her eyes sting. You can't promise that. Then give me a chance to prove it. She remained quiet, her heart pounding. The surroundings faded into the background. In a moment of impulse, she cradled his face and pressed her lips to his. A kiss brimming with all that had been restrained. In that instant, clarity emerged. The days that followed became a tempest of emotions. The revelation of Richard and Layla's relationship sent shockwaves through the media. Speculations ran rampant, gossip flourished, and many seemed to root for their downfall. Yet, none of that held any significance. They were filled with joy, and in a moment of reflection, Layla understood that she had never experienced such happiness before. A few months later, Richard invited her to a special dinner. A dinner that stood out from all the rest. As the clock chimed midnight, he knelt before her, presenting a velvet box. Marry me. Layla's heart raced, nearly leaping from her chest. What? Richard smiled. I understand you never intended for this to happen. I understand that marriage was never something you envisioned for yourself. But I also know I can't envision my life without you. Tears started to stream down her cheeks. Richard, I love you, Layla, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Her laughter mingled with tears, a beautiful blend of joy and emotion. And then she uttered the words that would alter the course of her existence eternally. Indeed, the wedding unfolded as a stunning and surprising occasion. In contrast to the extravagant celebrations of the elite, Richard envisioned an event that captured the true spirit of their relationship. The ceremony unfolded in the village of Layla's upbringing, nestled within the garden of her grandmother's home. Delicate blooms, twinkling lights draped from the branches, tables brimming with lovingly crafted dishes made by the community. Layla donned a delicate lace dress, simple yet enchanting, transforming her into a vision of royalty. Her hair flowed freely, adorned with delicate natural flowers interwoven throughout. Richard, in contrast, donned a suit that fit him impeccably, yet maintained a relaxed vibe without the added stiffness. He envisioned this day unfolding flawlessly for Layla. The whole village gathered together. Layla's grandmother wept with an intensity that was unprecedented. The townspeople applauded and felt a deep sense of emotion. As Richard and Layla affirmed their decision, the air filled with cheers and applause from every corner. The wedding was modest, yet brimming with affection. As the celebration approached, Layla observed something surprising. Richard felt utterly relaxed. He engaged in conversation, laughter bubbling around him, a plate brimming with yakisoba she had prepared earlier that day in his hands. He appeared far more approachable than the untouchable CEO that everyone talked about. He appeared to be a man deeply devoted to his wife. Layla beamed with joy. She could never have foreseen the direction her life would take. Yet, as she gazed at Richard in the village of her childhood, it dawned on her that he was as much a part of that place as she was. As the moment approached for the guests to shower the newlyweds with rice, Richard gently grasped Layla's hand and murmured, "Now you're officially mine forever." With a playful grin, she responded, "I hope you're ready to spend forever with a headstrong chef." He chuckled softly and pressed his lips to hers once more. What are your thoughts on the tale of Richard and Layla? We invite you to express your opinions in the comments section. How would you evaluate this story on a scale from 0 to 10? Be sure to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to stay updated on all our narratives. You're welcome to explore more heartfelt narratives by clicking here on the final screen.